Common sense in the house.
Yo, introduce
Ready to
yourself,
get it
man.
open. We gonna catch wreck. What's up?
You know how they do, man, when they try to bring brothers down. The nation's so strong, they doing things throughout the community. They don't like brothers doing that type of stuff. Any organization, the brothers trying to help brothers, they gonna try to bring it down.
Common never needed to scream he was from the streets. The streets did it for him. In the smoky tension of 1990s hip-hop beefs, when diss tracks came with real-life consequences, he stood unshaken, calm, and composed. Why? It's because behind the verses and the metaphors stood a gang with a reputation that didn't bluff, the Four Corner Hustlers.
As far as handling business and getting things taken care of, so that's who I was affiliated with.
And in a city where words could get you killed, Common was speaking from a place of quiet immunity, the kind you don't pay for, the kind you earn by blood, by roots, by who whispers your name when the lights go out. But how did Common build such deep gang ties?
It was also good to see and read about you getting your hands dirty.
Yeah.
Like with the Four Corner Hustlers.
Yeah.
What's the Four Corner Hustlers, man?
Let's talk about it. Before the Grammys, before the movie roles, before the calm wisdom he speaks with today, Common was simply Lonnie Rashid Lynn Jr. Just a skinny kid with sharp lyrics and sharper instincts, navigating a world where poetry was power, but not the kind that protected you from bullets. This was early 90s Chicago.
Gang life is predominant there. That's the culture, man. That's why it wasn't too much like hip-hop coming out the crib, because the gangs is a way of life.
Common was from the Westside. But more than that, he was the West Side. His voice might have been smooth, but his life wasn't. He never had to ask for the respect he walks with. He didn't need to carry heat because he carried something heavier, a backing. And in a city where affiliation often meant survival, Common's ties ran deep, quiet but unmistakable.
The dudes that raised us, they gave us certain amounts of like laws, wisdom, stuff that just like moral conduct. In the streets.
The Four Corner Hustlers weren't the loudest gang in Chicago, but they didn't need to be. They had history, they had reach, and they had presence. They weren't just some corner crew. They were an institution on the West Side.
It was all brothers, and brothers fit under, it was different like groups in that organizations within brothers, and Four Corner Hustlers was just the dudes that I rolled with.
Common wasn't a shooter, and he wasn't running traps, but he rolled with them. They were his people, not because he needed protection, but because they came up together. He talks about it now with a kind of distant warmth, like someone remembering scars that don't hurt anymore. Back then, fighting was a rite of passage. You caught hands before you caught cases. We weren't trying to remove you from this earth, he once said, just beat you enough to remind you who you were messing with.
Remove you from this earth.
Right.
We were trying to beat you till you couldn't move, but like, but not,
allegedly.
Yeah, but not remove you from the earth.
That's how boys became men, how reputations were earned the hard way, and how Common stayed solid without ever selling out.
Fighting was part of it, becoming a man. I got whooped sometimes, I whooped, it was like, it was all part of the process of becoming a man.
But don't get it twisted. It wasn't a Hollywood coming-of-age story, it was survival. Common had a foundation thanks to his mother, but he wasn't immune to the streets. He saw brothers veer off into dope and death despite having good families. He had choices to make, every day. And he knew the line between brilliance and self-destruction was paper thin. So he fought to stay clear, fought to stay himself. The difference was people saw something in him. Seth did.
It's also not only what you saw in other people, but what people saw in you. Because you talked about like your man Seth.
Yeah.
Like who really actually altered your trajectory as well.
Seth, as he was also known, was deep in the Four Corner Hustler royalty.
Seth came from a big family. Rest in peace to Seth. God bless his soul. He was a dude that would like, he point blank was like, he ranked amongst the 4 CHs, amongst the Four Corner Hustlers.
His younger brother had been shot. The streets had eaten up a lot of people Seth loved, but he looked at Common and saw something worth protecting, worth pushing. You a leader, he told him, act like it. Common didn't want that weight, didn't think he was cut out for it. He wasn't trying to be some street prophet or neighborhood messiah. He just wanted everyone to be good, to be whole.
I ain't trying to get killed, you know what I'm saying? Like, I wasn't trying to go that far.
But Seth wouldn't let it go. He saw the path before Common did. The pen, the presence, the potential. And in a way, that protection the Four Corner Hustlers offered wasn't just physical. It was ideological. It was, we'll hold you down, but you gotta rise above this. You gotta be more than this.
Seth, taught me some things. Like, he taught me some things when it came down the street things, and at the same token, he was like, man, you special. You got something. And you got to take on that, like...
You're a leader.
You're a leader.
Right.
You got to take on that leadership, bro.
Not every young man in Chicago had that. That's why Common still breathes when so many don't. He never repped the gang like an enforcer. He wasn't throwing signs in his videos or glorifying the life. But the affiliation was real. Real enough that even the hardest cats knew to keep it respectful. That's why he could walk down any street without looking over his shoulder. Not because he was untouchable, but because he was accounted for. The streets knew who he was. And more importantly, who he was with. The streets that could have buried him gave him the foundation to rise. They gave him muscle memory, not just to dodge punches or duck trouble, but to recognize what mattered. He said it himself, to whom much is given, much is required. And whether it was Seth, or the Four Corner Hustlers, or that unshakable Westside spirit, something saw fit to give him a lot.
I had to embrace that. I had to feel that confidence.
But it took some time, though.
Man, it took time, man. It took time. And you hear, no matter what, we don't get to hear it from all the leaders that we see that are leaders.
Maybe that's why during Ice Cube's beef with Common didn't hesitate to respond with the you in 1996. It was like watching David clock Goliath with a mic. Let's be clear, Cube came for Common first in interviews, then in the Westside Connection's Westside Slaughterhouse, where they made pointed allusions, mocking Common's Chicago roots and his ode to a changing hip-hop. According to Mac 10, it wasn't even really about Common anymore. The diss track was ancient history, but this friend of Common's had a chip on his shoulder.
The issue was with his homeboy. It wasn't even about the diss record.
Aha.
The issue came with his homeboy stepped out, and I don't know, maybe he was feeling some kind of way about the diss record.
Whatever it was, he stepped wrong, and Mac's crew was ready to pounce. But here's where fate, or maybe Fat Joe, stepped in. Fat Joe was there that day. He wasn't part of the beef, but he was part of hip-hop, and he was respected. So when things started bubbling, he calmed the storm, pulled Common's friend aside, diffused the ticking bomb before anyone got hurt. Common later said Fat Joe saved his life that day.
That brother kind of saved my life.
Fat Joe.
Fat Joe saved my life.
What do you mean?
What's wild is that Common remained untouched. No punches, no bruises, just another lesson in rap diplomacy and street survival. He walked through that fire without a scar. And Mac 10 confirmed the story too, said he respected Common for stepping into the arena with Ice Cube in the first place. That takes guts. And in hip-hop, even your enemy can respect your bravery. It's also worth noting how mature the ending was. After years of distance, Ice Cube and Common would go on to collaborate on music, in film, barbershop. The next cut dropped in 2016 with both men on the cast list smiling for the same cameras. They even recorded a track together, Real People. But back then, in the thick of it, it could have gone the other way, easily. And the only reason it didn't was because Common kept his cool and kept some real people close. But who exactly were the Four Corner Hustlers? They weren't loud like the GDs. They didn't move like the Vice Lords. But they pulled strings in the shadows. If you walked through the heart of West Garfield Park in the early 1970s, you wouldn't hear the Four Corner Hustlers before you felt them. Their presence wasn't about graffiti tags on every wall or a parade of bodies claiming colors. It was about the strange stillness they brought, how entire blocks seemed to fall silent when one of their top men stepped into view. To outsiders, they were barely known. But to the West Side, they were law.
When I first came to the Hundreds, it was already established, but they still was starting to really just get their name, you know what I mean?
Okay.
So like the mid-'80s, the late 80s.
It all started in 1968 when two teenagers, Walter Wheat and Freddie Gage, looked at their neighborhood and saw what nobody else was seeing: a quiet invasion. Other gangs were flooding in, pushing dope, pulling triggers, and poisoning blocks that still had some fight left in them. Wheat and Gage weren't saints, far from it, but they weren't trying to destroy their own backyard either. So they did what few had the guts to do. They formed a gang with rules. No drugs, no stick-ups, no breaking into homes. You could steal from delivery trucks, sure. You could knock some teeth out if needed. But if you brought heroin into the neighborhood, you were signing your death sentence. Their home turf wasn't some abstract claim. The name Four Corner Hustlers wasn't just catchy, it was literal. They held 4 intersections and the streets that tied them together like arteries: Madison and Pulaski, Independence and Madison, Pulaski and Jackson, Independence and Jackson, and in between, a grid of heat: Springfield and Wilcox, Monroe and Hamlin, Adams and Pulaski. These weren't just blocks, they were checkpoints. And if you walked through one, you'd better have a reason.
On the west side of Chicago, they pretty massive. On the south side of Chicago, we deep enough, man. Like, I mean, you done heard a few, like Bumpy J. He one of the foes, man. Like, it's foes on the south side. They spread it though. Like 107, that's one of our strongholds.
And yet, despite their firepower, the Four Corner Hustlers didn't have rappers shouting them out. They didn't go viral in local news. They kept quiet because silence worked. Silence meant survival. They were a syndicate built on whisper networks and nods behind tinted glass. Unlike the flamboyance of the Vice Lords or the sprawling street warfare of the GDs, the Fours moved like smoke. Everywhere and nowhere, their structure was tight, more pyramid than web. You didn't just walk in and claim a rank. You earned it, sometimes in blood, sometimes in silence. And once you were in for life. They'd started out under the Vice Lord's shadow though.
The Four Corners Hustlers, staking or not, are they Vice Lords or under the Vice Lord Nation?
Yes, sir, we are. We under the Vice Lord Nation.
In fact, Wheat and Gage had both once rolled with the unknown Vice Lords, but after the 1972 shooting of Officer Henderson Arnold during a Valentine's Day party gone wrong, the Fours stepped out of the shadows. Gage did 10 years. Wheat got his own bid later. But in those prison walls, they carved out alliances. They inked truces with Vice Lords behind bars, cutting prison wars short. But on the streets, the lines got murkier. By the late 70s, the Fours weren't just protecting corners anymore. They were in the business. By the early 1980s, after Freddie Gage's mysterious death from poisoned moonshine, things shifted. The rules changed. Monroe Money Banks took the reins. And with him came the money. Drug money. And once Wheat got out, he saw what his code had become. A loose interpretation built on greenbacks and street clout. Banks ran things. And Wheat, though respected, took the back seat. But silence breeds betrayal too. Angelo Lowe Roberts was a loyal soldier who refused to testify, took charges on the chin, and held down the streets while Banks and Wheat sat on the throne. So he rose quickly. Wheat even gave him his blessing unofficially, and Lowe didn't waste time. Under Lowe, the Four Corner Hustlers exploded. He let Latinos form their own wing, the Spanish Four Corner Hustlers. He opened the doors to other races. He expanded to Atlanta. He was building an empire. But every empire needs a fall guy. And in 1994, Wheat became one. Shot in the head while waiting in his Oldsmobile on West Chicago Avenue, the founder of the Four Corner Hustlers bled out in silence. The message was clear. Silence doesn't protect you forever. Allegedly, Lowe ordered the hit. He saw Wheat as a backseat driver who wanted control without putting in the work. But in killing his mentor, Lowe crossed a line, one too deep to step back from. Months later, his own body was found in the backseat of a car on 70th and Vernon. His throat slit, partially frozen. No witnesses, no statements, just a cold end to a hot rain. That's how the Four Corner Hustlers worked. Not with explosions, but with surgical cuts. They didn't need to shout. And soon enough, a more dangerous gang started to form under the umbrella of the Four Corner Hustlers. The Body Snatchers weren't some myth whispered about in alleyways or hyped up for street cred. They were real. And in the blood-soaked rise of the Four Corner Hustlers, no one embodied that truth more than Raymond Shaky Sean Betts. To some, he was a prince. To others, a tyrant. But everyone, friend or foe, called him dangerous. Shaky Sean moved like a ghost with the weight of a regime on his shoulders, a man whose name struck silence in rooms that once rang with bravado. His rise wasn't dramatic, but it was calculated. No wild shootouts for notoriety, no viral stunts for clout. Instead, Shaky studied the streets like a chessboard. Born into the environment, he didn't just survive, he thrived in the shadows, building a faction within the Fours that would come to dominate corners and crush rivals with surgical efficiency. From the jump, Shaky didn't want fame. But by the early 90s, he'd etched his name into Westside legend. He birthed the Body Snatchers faction, an arm of the Four Corner Hustlers known not just for money, but for mayhem. They were known for arsons, ambushes, and orchestrated killings.
No, ain't no way to stop because of the history of what's been going on and the killings and the going back and forth. So basically, like used to do when we was young.
The type of faction that had detectives tapping lines and gang units running surveillance 24/7. The kind that forced the city to blink first. It wasn't even only rivals that feared the body snatchers. Even among the four-corner hustlers, there was tension. Shaky's power wasn't just top-down, it was viral. He pulled people in, chewed them up, and spit them out as loyal soldiers. Those who hesitated didn't last long. Even other four-corner factions started playing defense around him. It wasn't that he claimed control, it's that no one dared deny it. However, in 1994, Shaky caught a heavy case, armed violence and aggravated. He was sentenced to 12 years, served 8 in the Tampa Supermax, one of Illinois' harshest prisons. You'd think that would have slowed him down. But when a top boss in the gang named Ray Longstreet went down in 2004, Betts was conveniently up for parole.
Because everybody was fighting for leadership, bro. Everybody wanted to be, you know, at that time.
The timing was perfect. The streets knew it. The feds probably knew it too. There was talk that he and another contender named Burpee were both gunning to fill the vacuum. And judging by the way the city moved, preemptive raids, heroin busts, a $10,000 a day operation torn down brick by brick, they were scared of what Shaky might become. They had reason to be. Between 2004 and 2010, the four-corner hustlers came under a microscope. Dozens of coordinated raids, high-level investigations, but Shaky kept sliding through somehow. In 2008, he caught a marijuana charge in a massive bust called Operation Capitol Hill. 55 people went down. Still, Betts didn't fold. He just went back in, served his time, and slid out again like he'd only paused for air. But it was 2019 that sealed his fate. By then, he wasn't just an OG, he was a commander. The feds said he was distributing wholesale quantities of heroin, 136.4 grams across multiple deals between December 2018 and March 2019. The deliveries were organized drops, controlled, tidy. 7 went down in Austin, the hustler's home turf. 1 hit Riverdale far south. That alone showed reach. But it wasn't just where, it was where next. He was expanding, eyeing northern Indiana. Quiet moves with loud consequences. Unknown to him, the feds were already listening. He was being recorded, watched, studied. His trusted associate had flipped and became a confidential informant. And with feds listening in, Shaky unknowingly narrated his own downfall. One moment stood out. "I know I ain't going to be around forever," he said on tape. He was right. When the hammer dropped in May 2019, it didn't just fall on him. It landed on his co-conspirators too. Angela, who was 52 years, and Maurice, who was 54. The 68-page indictment from the feds didn't tie him to the murders, didn't connect him directly to the countless bodies buried in the Snatchers' shadow, but it didn't need to. Both of his conspirators pled guilty. By January 2023, Shaky pled guilty to conspiracy to distribute heroin. In March, the gavel came down. He got 10 years in federal prison. Add to that 8 years of supervised release. For a man in his mid-50s, that's nearly a life bid. He'll be almost 70 when he walks free, if he walks free. Though not a gang member, this was how deep Common's gang ties went. Of course, he had already left the life before Shaky became so much of a menace. But Common's story in Chicago wasn't just about rap. It was about survival in the intersection of music and street life, where respect was earned by your ability to navigate the complex, sometimes dangerous network of influences in the Westside. In a city where affiliations ran deeper than music, Common's proximity to some of the most notorious gang figures in the city gave him street credibility that few could rival, and even fewer dared to challenge. He didn't claim the block. The block claimed him.
I was just trying to come up and take care of their punks, bro. You know how it is.
While other rappers, especially those in the gangster rap lane, had to play the game carefully, staking their reputation on the dangerous alliances they forged, Common navigated the street's murky waters with a unique balance. He wasn't a gangster in the traditional sense, yet there was an unspoken understanding that he was aligned with those who were. But that didn't mean Common was immune from the dangers of his surroundings. The west side of Chicago wasn't a place where even the most successful rapper could stroll through untouched. Gang violence was a constant presence, and beefs, whether in the streets or in the rap game, could quickly escalate. Yet, Common wasn't dragged into the same problems many of his peers faced. Despite his undeniable proximity to some of the city's most dangerous men, the hustlers knew he was about something different, something bigger than the chaos of the streets. He was the type of person who used his platform to spread a message, not to stir up conflict. And that in itself earned him a type of respect that was just as real as the street code they lived by.